Hello guys, Eyeduka is back, and for today I have a list of suggestions for Throne and Liberty, which the developers may or may not listen to, that in my opinion will improve the experience and will probably attract more people. So right now you already have the sync system, which allows you to just have one max level item. There is one thing here, you actually have one slot for weapon and you do need 2 slots, and the same goes for ring, by the way. So maybe they can actually look into this, but you still need to look into the traits, right? In most cases that's not a problem, because your next weapon or your next piece of gear would most likely be a completely different item. So yes, you're gonna put a different traits on it. However, think about the situation where you're gonna be using the same item for both PvE and PvP. You would probably want to have completely different traits on it. Just for example, this weapon, right, can have 3 traits out of 6. Now, if you use it for PvE, you'd use certain traits, and for PvP, you'd probably use different traits. And if it's the same item, then that's a problem, right? So that is really too bad right now. You can't really use that in the most optimal way. These traits here are mostly for PvP. For PvE, however, you may want to remove the hit chance and probably add max HP. And there could be many other different options, and that's just weapon. Obviously, the different items have different options, generally speaking. My suggestion would be to give us the option to unlock any of the traits on item and just swap it in between different builds if you're using the same item. And this could be all added to the combat setting system, something related to the gear preset. It may seem a bit difficult or a bit complicated to be done, but it would help people even more. Probably not the most important thing out there, but I just wanted to put it out there just in case. So the next thing I want to talk about is runes. Right now, pretty much similar situation. This is in kind of like the same category as the previous suggestion. When you have this setup, for instance, I'm using just this weapon right now for both PvE and PvP. But obviously, you want to have completely different runes for the different types of content. Now, you can easily just swap the runes right now, keep the same synergy and swap these runes and just put on anything you want, really. However, what if you want to change the synergy, right? The only way to do it now is if you just remove the rune, click on this button right here, reset, and then you can just change to anything you want. And you can actually look into the synergy list first and then change it to whatever you like. However, as you can see, it actually costs a lot of sound as well if you do this all the time. Plus, it's really not convenient, even if it costs sound. And let's say sound is not a problem. Well, it is actually, but just for the argument, you still have to do all these manual activities. So that's really not ideal in my opinion. So it would be great if you have the option to just add this function to the presets as well. So you can be able to switch synergy in a bit more mainstreamed way. It's pretty similar like the Masteries before. I think they're already working on a new rune system where it's going to make things a bit easier. But yeah, I just wanted to put this out there. So I think a lot of people are already struggling, not just me, with having to just constantly swap these. Right now, the only realistic optimal way of doing it is just simply having 2 sets of items, right? Which, as you know, the game is still pretty grindy, even though we have some improvements. Tier 2 is just grindier than before anyway, so it's going to be really difficult right now to actually have 2 different sets for different content. So the next thing, one of the biggest improvements that they can make, you see these practice dummies right here. You can just do whatever you want here. You can just test out your DPS and stuff like that. But this doesn't really give you the best estimation. Feels like these dummies don't have huge stats on them. So when you're doing different types of content, PvP, PvE wise, regardless, you're not going to get these numbers. So you really don't get much out of it except just practicing your rotation and just seeing some numbers. Now, my suggestion here is create a training ground. It could be a specific instance, specific area, just like, let's say, the guild hall area, but with one specific purpose. In this place, you would be able to fully test out your builds, being able to actually put maxed out gear and max out your stats and everything just as a test, right? And now this is kind of like going a bit against their business model, because if you can preview in-game how your build behaves, you might be readjusting it in a way that is going to make you spend less resources on actually getting the gear, because right now you cannot really test it. And once you get the gear, you may not be very happy with it. And now you're going to have to keep grinding again to get a different item. And if we have that kind of training ground where you can actually just test out, like some games have that, like a showcase of a maxed out character before you actually get into the game, which is great. You can actually see what you can get in the end. And if you don't like it, you can literally just, from the beginning, change the whole setup. But yeah, I think this is a bit too much to ask, but still, some games have it, like Guild Wars 2, for instance. You have a training ground in raids where you can actually test your DPS and also put on different buffs on you and on the enemy, set up the stats of the enemy as well, which is the next thing I want to say. Like, it would be great if you add training dummies, can have adjustable stats, so you can actually properly test your build against a different build. Could be PvP oriented type of setup, so you can actually adjust, for instance, things like evasion, endurance, all kinds of stats. Like, the more we have, the better. And you can actually see what you can do with your current builds and be able to theory craft more efficiently. And with that being said, they could add additionally DPS and threat or aggro meter in the game as well. Now, DPS would be great in almost any situation regardless, because it actually gives you some information on how you're performing, and you can actually benchmark your actual build in the game. And the aggro meter would be mostly for PvE, and it's great for pretty much everybody, because in PvE the classical situation is the tank would take the aggro so that the boss is just attacking him and you can position the boss. And it would be really helpful if we actually have some sort of meter or some sort of indication to understand how much aggro we have, if we even have the aggro. If the tank is not well geared and you're actually a DPS that is very well geared, you can see if you're getting close to take the aggro. So this would help with rotations and all kinds of things. It's just generally a quality of life thing to add. I don't think it's really that difficult to be added. It really depends on the way they designed this sort of mechanic in the game. Like in other games, it might be different, but yeah, that's just another thing called DPS and aggro meter for Throne and Liberty. Now, the next suggestion for the game would be, once you put your mouse on top of any of these stats, you do see some information right here. You pretty much click on any of those. However, the information is very limited, very basic. It gives you the concept of how it's calculated, but I don't think that's really enough for you to fully understand how it works. In most cases, people would be going outside in external websites and reading all kinds of other sources, just pretty much outsourced information, because inside the game, you really cannot understand everything. You almost always gonna have to need to go somewhere else to try to understand how all these stats work. And a small solution to that could be to add a bit more detailed information about the stats. Otherwise, right now, most people are probably used to just look at their stats. Kind of like the knowledge that they have is coming from outside, and because they have that knowledge from outside, from other websites, they kind of like have that perception of what is enough and what is not. But if those other websites didn't exist, and you didn't have those, and you didn't have the extra information from there, a lot of people would not be able to truly understand the whole thing. Like, it's not realistic to test out absolutely everything before you actually get it, because the thing is, the game is very grindy. So most people don't have the time to actually test out so much before they can understand what is good and what is not. And sure, you can use the argument, yeah, those websites are already there. They don't need to add these things here. But this is really just the whole philosophy of how things should work. In my opinion, a good game doesn't require you to constantly have a second monitor opened, so you can just check on every once in a while to actually play the game. This is really not the best experience. And there are other games that actually have that same issue, in my opinion. This all comes down to the mentality of the players. Now, for some people, that's really the only way to go. But again, that's just not the healthiest approach for any game in general. So next thing I would suggest, in a lot of situations, boss fights, world bosses, wherever it might be, they have a bit more complex mechanics, especially the dungeon ones. The field bosses, most of the time, they get very trivial. A good mechanic or good boss fight would have redemption mechanics. What I mean by redemption mechanic, so the game does have redemption mechanics, just not in a lot of areas. For instance, right now I can show you, Eyeduka is an example of that. You know, the mechanic where he puts a lot of people to sleep, and during that sleep, they can't really do anything. We have to wait a relatively long time. However, there are 3 people on the sides that have a wasp around them. They can move close to the rest of the people that are put to sleep, and that just wakes them up. This is called a redemption mechanic. However, in this case, it's really unavoidable. It's necessary to have it in this fight. Another example of that would be Great Alon. Now, this is slightly different. This is the better way that this is designed, a more interesting and engaging way. He has a mechanic where he can cage people, put them like in vines, in like roots, and they cannot do anything. and the rest of the team have to free them up. Otherwise, they're going to take a lot of damage, maybe even die. However, before that, they can actually avoid getting there. So it's not like with Eridus, it's 100% guaranteed everybody in that range will be put to sleep. With Grand Alon, however, you can avoid that because you actually see a circle underneath. If you move away, you're not going to get trapped, but sometimes you may make that mistake. And of course, this is pretty easy, like relatively speaking. Small to field boss will be easy, but in many cases with the dungeons, any of the dungeons do have very punishing mechanics. And ideally, the top games, if we have to compare this to, like, let's say World of Warcraft, which is probably one of the best games for dungeons and raids, generally speaking, but you do have also Guild Wars 2. It's also pretty good. Most of these games, the way they design things is that they add redemption mechanics. Instead, what we see from Korean games, on the other hand, is that they make them really punishing, and that if you make a small mistake, it's pretty much done. It's pretty much over. Like, you can't really have any room for mistakes, which is actually a bit too demanding for the majority of the people. A redemption mechanic would be, instead of instantly dying, obviously there would be instant death mechanics, but very often you have other mechanics that also kind of leads to instant death, even if they're not really like that. They're just really punishing, and you can't really get away from that. Like, for instance, a good example right now I can show you right here is the Chapel of Madness. You have Grey Eye. You have to find some ghosts or zombies, however you want to call them, during the phases, and if you don't find them, if you don't kill them, they buff the boss. He gets 10 stacks, and when he's buffed, you do less damage to him and he's doing more damage to you. And there is no way you can remove that. A redemption mechanic would simply mean if you make that mistake, if you cannot actually kill them, there would be a way for you to remove the stacks by doing some extra steps, right? This is called redemption mechanic. So if you're not that good at actually doing the mechanic, you can kind of revert the effect, but it's going to take you more time, generally speaking, and a bit more effort. But it may be actually easier. As you can see, they have redemption mechanics for some of the areas, but not always. So just something to look into, and maybe remove some of those OTK things, even specifically for torture chambers. That's really one of the poor decisions they made here, is add this minion where it basically has this charge ability. And this is going to one-shot you if it pushes you to a wall, which in my opinion is just pretty much lazy design. It's just to slow people down. The redemption thing would be, you're not gonna die instantly, but it's gonna slow you down. The redemption aspect of it is basically that you just slow down. It's gonna take more time for you to do it. And if you're good enough, then you're not gonna get pushed and you can do it a bit faster. But instead, they just go all the way for simply killing you. Either way, you're still gonna do it. It's gonna take you, again, more time, but it's just more annoying, generally speaking. So the next thing is actually not really a suggestion. It's actually something that they have to work on and just improve in general. It's not a bug, but it's also not exactly the most ideal way of design. Is whenever you use a mobility skill or something that basic just moves you, you can have selected enemy in front of you. If that would be, let's say, in an abyssal dungeon. And if you use mobility skill, I kind of feel like, hey, I should be attacking this enemy directly in front of me, right? However, sometimes your mouse, your center of the mouse could be over an object that is behind you. It would move backwards even if you have the enemy in front of you, which is a very interesting and weird way of how mobility skills behave. This could be really annoying in many cases, even if you have targeted enemy. Some of the mechanics in dungeons, in Chapel of Madness, once again, the same boss, this fear mechanic that whenever your character is facing in that direction, you just fear friendly targets. The issue with this very often, and most people are really annoyed by that, is that it's not the way your camera is facing, rather where your character is facing. And I know it makes sense, however, it's way more intuitive for the sake of the gameplay to be where your camera is facing, because you would be moving around independently from the camera movement very often. And this just makes things really annoying. But again, this could be completely intentional, and they may or may not change it, but it would make the game a bit more pleasant. These skills right here, they can be extremely powerful and very strategic in many situations. So Eclipse Power is basically making the day night, so you can create night anytime you want. Of course, it has 12-hour cooldown. The way you get these skills is by being really high in ranks. Some of those are related to guild ranking, others to personal ranking, stuff like that. It doesn't really create a balanced environment for people to have one-to-one chance versus one another, on top of everything else as a pay-to-win game, regardless. That's this one. Then you see the Power Gale. This is basically about the wind, which it helps things like flying, stuff like that. It doesn't really state here, but it does. There are certain things that activate during the night. Some of your skills and some of the weapons, some of the passives behave in a different way during, let's say, during night or day. Same goes for this one is the wind, to be able to fly more in that direction, for instance. That's another thing. And it gives an extra layer of advantage to these people. And most of the time, you will never be in a situation to use these skills. Only a few people will have them. And it's mostly going to stay in the same people for a very long time. And this one is Heavy Rain, now, which does increase mana cost efficiency, cooldown speed for a certain period of time, short time, but it actually has rain for 10 minutes. And there are certain abilities that also benefit on top of that for having rain, like doing additional damage and stuff like that. Those things can make a difference in big fights specifically and can tip the scale to one direction or another. To have fun in the game, you don't need those things. It gives another layer of complexity and kind of like interesting twist events, but most of the time, see, very often it's going to be the same top tier players from the top tier guilds that will have these skills. So this is activity ranking that's related to all your activities that you do for X number of time. You're going to have this skill. The next one is kill ranking, which, the kill ranking would simply be the one that has the highest kill count and stuff like that, or the highest amount of points, which again, most of the time you see it's pretty much just one guild or a couple of guilds being maxed out all the time because they're paid to win, basically, players. Right here we have Orca Black and Orca White, and there could be a couple of other people. Most of the time it's just dominated by them. And then you have guild ranking as well, which is pretty much the same stuff. You see, same guild. You see that right now, all of that is dominated by the same one guild. All the 3 abilities are in one guild. So you can imagine the kind of advantage they have. That's really not engaging. It's not really that interesting in my opinion. And now this brings me to the next thing, which I've said so many times before that, and this is alliances. Once again, yeah, some people like it, some people will not like it. Right now I do have alliance in the new guilds that we merged together. Basically, alliance is just 4 guilds that are friendly and they play together. However, the way this is made is that very often the top guilds being united together and they'll just dominate all the time. That's one of the things. Very similar story is happening now in Nebula Island, if you check it out. So here in Nebula Island, it's all-time PvP area. You have a small PvE area here as well, but most of it is PvP. You're going to be trying to compete with a lot of people trying to farm, and right now it's a very popular place because there's just a lot of interest in it. You can get some good gear from it most of the time. Joining in as a new player, you either have a very small guild or you don't even have a guild. You're really not going to do any of this content, basically. You're going to be locked out. Even if you do have a guild, it's going to be really difficult unless this guild is like in the top ranks and you have a lot of people, because every single spot in here is going to be populated by players. And it's actually not that big if you think about it. You have dead spots as well, like where there are no enemies or very little enemies. So this is one of the things I suggested before. I'm going to say it again. Improve the whole alliance system. Either rework it or remove it altogether. It makes something like classical battlegrounds where you have 2 teams just queuing, for instance, just like let's say arena. Right now we don't have any battleground to actually show you, but a lot of games have not only arena but also battleground, which could probably be Nebula, where people can queue, and once you have the number of players needed to enter, the minimum number of players needed to enter, you just put them in, and you have 2 teams, regardless of their guilds that they represent or whatever. You just queue in. It's gonna be random matchmaking, so you can end up with strong people, you can have with weak people. So it's kind of like a fair thing, right? Very similar to arena right now. You can just queue and just get random people. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Either way, it's okay. It's the most fair way. I give example once again with Guild Wars 2 or World of Warcraft. They have made the mass PvP content so well. Anybody can join in and actually have fun with this content. However, right now, your best bet of actually going here is if you go during the night, like late hours or very early hours in the morning, and find like a small group, similar, like you just going crazy during those hours that are like off-peak hours. You don't have much people and most people just farming. Otherwise, you could be wasting your time not getting anything. Just as a comparison, here you see I have just above 2 hours left. Last night, it was early in the morning, I've spent about 2 hours out of 5 hours, and I managed to get over 20, maybe 30 Nebula stones, a bunch of these other chests, and also some bags directly. Even I think greater Nebula stones. So that's pretty good for 2 hours roughly. And we had some PvP, but mostly it was pretty clean and you can do a lot of PvP. However, today I went for almost 1 hour, so let's say half the time, and I didn't even get 1/5 of what I got yesterday. So it was much more populated. You have no chance of actually killing enemies. I barely got like just a couple of stones, I think, maybe 1 or 2. So yeah, it's pretty rough situation. The alliance rework could be very good, but again, a lot of those things are going down to their business model and how they want to treat their player base. Do they want more people to get into the game? Do they want more people that just simply are willing to spend a lot of money? It's all about the pay to win business model that they have. So they may not be interested in just attracting more people, instead attracting more people that are willing to spend a lot of money. And we talked about that before, that you really need, I'd say, about 1,000 or more dollars or euro, whatever, to just make one build. That's a game that emphasizes on having a single character that can have multiple builds on it. And you do have that as presets, for instance. That just kind of tells you that you can run multiple different builds on the same character. But with the current state, that would simply mean, hey, we give you the option to have multiple builds, but you're also going to have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to actually make that happen. I don't believe that they would look into things that would their capability of just getting directly money from set number of people, which means that in most of the cases, the game will remain in this situation. We're not really going to get something that crazy or something that different. Personally, I don't believe the game is going to stay in a good state for very long. It's already losing a lot of players. I know it sounds very grim recently, but yeah, it's just not looking good. The game is pretty much reserved pay-to-win players, and you're not gonna get too far as a free-to-play casual player or whatever. It's just not for you. That game is just not for casuals, just not for the majority of the players. That reflects by the number of people actually playing the game. You go on Steam, like I've showed before, you can check it anytime. The numbers are just shrinking every single day. Having this low number of players is just kind of bad. In Nebula, you have a lot of dead spots that literally doesn't have anything, and also the density of the mobs is just pretty low. Considering that the area is not that big and you do have a lot of people going in, they could have increased the density. Because in the end of the day, what you're really doing here is half the time you're PvPing others, which doesn't actually give you anything. Maybe instead you could just increase the reward from the PV stuff, because in the end of the day, you're just hoping for randomly to get some of the stuff that you can obtain. You do have limited time, so you can't really farm indefinitely. They could add at least, let's say, Sound into this, right? I don't even know if you get actual weapon mastery or it's just the Abyssal Dungeon. They should add weapon mastery to everything, considering how grindy it is. Let's say above 120 or something. And add Sound, definitely add Sound, because you do need a lot of Sound. So I want to touch this other subject right here. Basically, these materials, obsidian piece, pretty interesting stuff. One of these weapons, the Black Anvil weapons, as you can see, they're not really that special, except one thing. They give you this Black Anvil passion that increases sound and weapon mastery by 50%, and it doesn't stack, so you can only have one of them. There are two concerns about that. First, you only have to farm this area. It's literally saying 3 types of dwarves. The drop rate is extremely low. It doesn't really state here, you can't really see anything specific, but the drop rate for this is very low. I've been here a couple of times. Didn't farm for too long, but I only have 2 pieces and you need 100 of these. You need 100 pieces to build one weapon. I've heard some people saying that it requires dozens of hours. Some people say like 20 hours, so there's like all the way to like 90 hours range as a full party, by the way. So to me, this is pretty much like violating human rights, honestly. This is just super, they don't respect your time as a human being. For a game that require an estimation of freaking 90 hours or even less, like 50 hours, whatever. It's absurd. It's ridiculous to get this. Consider that these weapons are supposed to be base level weapons, because as you can see, they don't give you anything else except the bonus. Like, it's very base stats. They don't have any other stat points or pass effect, anything whatsoever. Just the base weapon itself and that bonus. So what I'm thinking, this is supposed to be kind of like entry-level weapon, help you level up faster, because the weapon mastery is pretty much everything that we're leveling right now. Anything else is just grind. It's a bit tricky how this works. By the time you get these, if you're not specifically grinding to get that, which is pretty much soul crushing, I would not recommend anybody to go on and grind for these shits. It's just gonna make you hate the game so much. Realistically, if you're not doing this and if you're just playing the game, and every once in a while, you're going to obtain a couple of pieces. I think even the boss drops, but I'm not 100% sure. At some point, maybe you're going to get 100 pieces. Kind of like in late game, so you don't really care too much about this. So it's really weird the way they made it. And another kind of like a problem is when you're fighting, when you're killing stuff in Abyssal Dungeon, the XP that you obtain is only going towards this weapon. So particularly if you get one of the weapons, let's say a greatsword, you get to a point when you max it out, you would probably want to try to play with something else in order to get the total master level. then what are you going to do next? There is no option to swap the weapon. So that suggests that you need to actually go on and grind again another 100 pieces to get a different weapon so that you can start leveling up that other weapon, right? And you can just combine it with other weapons. So you're either going to have to just swap one of the weapons, and you're always going to be maxed out at this weapon, so you're not really benefiting the most, because if you have two weapons, you're going to level up both of them almost at the same time. If you have one weapon already maxed out, then you're losing the potential to level up a second weapon. So you can always swap the second one, but you want to need this one for the buff. So ideally, you'd want to have two completely new weapons. Let's say I'm leveling up right now Greatsword and Sword. Let's say I get to 200 in both of them. Then ideally, I would want to swap builds in order to increase my total level and not just waste weapon mastery XP when I'm doing dungeons. So probably, let's say, go for Spear and Dagger, for instance, right? So I'm gonna have to just grind again to get another Black Anvil weapon. So to me, this is pretty crazy. I think even if it's that grinding, you should at least give us the option to just swap that weapon. I know this is like very end game stuff, but at some point you're gonna be maxed out and you may wanna have a different weapon for your combination in order to continue benefit from this exceptional grind, I would say. So just at least give us the option to be able to swap Black Anvil weapon for any other Black Anvil weapon. So you're never going to have to do this grind again. If it's that big, because this is huge, I would strongly recommend for them to look into this and just make it a bit more realistic so that people can still get that without this crazy, insane grind. In the end of the day, this is just somewhat a weapon mastery bonus. 50% may seem a lot, but some time ago there was a huge event where we were supposed to get like 100% bonus to both weapon mastery and Sound. Now with weapon mastery, it's a bit more difficult to actually see the bonus. With Sound, however, before that I was able to get, let's say, about 25,000 Sound per kill. That was before the Landre. When this bonus effect we got, it's supposed to be like 100%, I think. So you'd be thinking that's double, right? If I'm able to get 25,000 Soland per kill, not always, of course, but was managing to do that in Cities Abyss, you'd think 100% means I should get to about 40 or even close to 50,000 Soland per kill from time to time, right? It's not guaranteed. However, the highest Soland I think I've seen at this point was about 30, maybe a bit more than 30,000. So it doesn't feel like double. It feels like some boost, but not double. So I'm not quite sure how this bonus effect really stacks up with other things. It may not be that obvious and you may get confused. So at the end of the day, it may turn out to be not that epic as it seems. Definitely recommend for them to just make it a little bit higher drop rates. I mean, it doesn't have to be super easy, but a little bit more realistic. Maybe similar to Abyssal Aggregate, or even if it's a little bit less. I mean, it's fine. Also give us the option to just swap the weapon anytime we want for maybe a small fee or something. And definitely, I would not recommend anybody to trade these weapons. Get it on synced weapon, so it's level 12. Don't level it up, don't trade it up, just put it out there and just to get the bonus, right? With that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the content, hit the like, subscribe button, and see you next time.